All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are resuming now, and this time we're resuming for real. So, once more, this is our final panel, and this panel will be moderated by Saif. And this panel is titled AI and its Impact on the Economy and Society. Saif?
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Saif. It's an absolute joy to help moderate this panel. For everyone who's been here today, I think it's clear that the Gordon Institute has put on the table a range of important issues for our consideration in this strange world that we're in now as we think about how frontier technologies connect with the public policy environment that we're operating in. And when Brian and Randy and Mike Asensio reached out to me to be able to curate and put together a discussion like this, which is really about AI's impact on economy and society, I said to myself, you can't have an AI panel that doesn't start with AI, which means you have an all-Indian panel. So, and my sister Lili also, because we're both from South America, so we've got that both Indian and indigenous combined. So that's a little bit of levity to begin the day, obviously. So before we begin with our prestigious panelists, I just wanted to put, and I had an image. We're not going to share it now, but I want to give a mental construct for everybody that I've been using a lot that I think can help us understand this interplay of AI, economy, and our society. And I talked about it with our panelists when we did our prep call. So the image I want everybody to think about when we think about AI, economy, and our society is this idea of a game of table tennis or ping pong. And in this game of table tennis, what we have is on one end of the table, humans, right? So we're there holding our table tennis racket. And on the other end is a machine. So we think about an algorithm, and we think about whatever manifestation of that technology you want it to be. That volley, that exchange of human-machine interface, how we learn from the machines and the algorithms, how they are engaging in rapid computational power-fueled adaptive learning. The future and so much of what we're talking about and with this esteemed panel is really about a deeper dive into that volley. So wherever you are in the landscape, if you are somebody like Madam School Board Chair, who we're so lucky to have, Maritera Rojas, Madam Chair, so glad you're here, or if you're an academician, or if you're a leader in local government like Margaret Brisbane and Ana Chamas, or if you are a researcher working on this, all of us are somewhere in the volley. The question really comes down to where is the ping pong going and where is it coming from? And so I think that that's the point of departure that I wanted to start with, that when we think about AI's impact on economy and society, it really gives us a grounding to understand that we are in the intensity. The best part of any ping pong match, we know, isn't when you spike the ball, but it's actually when you're starting to develop this rhythmic flow. So we're in the volley, and we're better placed to start than with my friend Lili, who, for those of you who don't know, she is a leader at the Kapor Center, and which is one of America's most prestigious organizations that really focuses on a range of these frontier technology issues. But quite frankly, how do they intersect with human beings? And so, Lili, you've been working in this space for such a long time, right? Around how do, on one end, historically underrepresented communities show up and engage with frontier technologies. You've been involved in closing the computer science gap in America, making sure communities, Latinas and others are there at the table, but you've also been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence and what this means. So I'd like to start with you to share a little bit about your work, your journey, because a lot of times people talk about this work, and I think this matters for our scientists and researchers that are in the room. Lili is indeed somebody who's a thought leader, but she's an engineer. And I think that this is a very different face of when we think about who are the leaders that are going to help us push through these vexing challenges. So Lili, share with us a little bit about your work and how it connects to this bigger, complex thorny subject matter of AI and its impact on economy and the society.
Definitely. We'll do a little travel to the past so we can travel to the future, because you can't design your future if you don't know where you came from. And I think it's really important in a lot of the work that we do to understand the historical challenges that we are operating under. And so at the Kapor Center, the Kapor Foundation, we focus on racial justice, economic justice, and technology. And we are aware that a lot of communities, specifically Black, Latina, and Native communities, have been marginalized, have been discriminated upon. As we look at the history of redlining across all of our different communities, it's not by a guess, it's not by things that didn't happen. This has happened, right? So we are really at the frontier now of this new generation civil rights, but this is now our digital civil rights. And the reason I bring this up is because I think about it from my own personal experience as an immigrant, Latina, non-English speaking. My mom barely had any money to, make it through the month. But I was fortunate that my language was math, and math was able to help provide me a path into engineering, which really opened up a whole new world that I didn't know I could be part of. But it also provided an economic upward mobility that I didn't think was also available, right? And so if we look forward, that was like almost 20 years ago that I started my career in electrical engineering, then moved into software engineering, mostly because of this thing called automation. So things that we're seeing right now with AI, right, it's a fancy term just for advanced algorithms that are really automating and are doing a lot of analysis at just a larger scale. And I don't know how many of you all, and everything that we've done, everything that we do now, right, we've seen how things that we used to do in brick and mortar and in person, now it's all digitized. But in order to get to that journey, what did we give up? What did we gain? What are the trade-offs? And one of the challenges is that we have to make sure that in this new frontier, we're really educating not just ourselves, but the next generation of what are those trade-offs that we're making to get all this advancement in technologies. How is this actually complicating things of the past that we haven't fixed? And are we gonna take that into the future? And so for me, the work that I do is really looks at across how can we apply research, how we can apply programs, how can we apply grant making, and of course policy to make sure that we're addressing these gaps so we don't, without knowing or accelerating some of the disparities that we've known that we're trying to combat, right? We want everyone to have a fair chance and opportunity of upward economic mobility, but ultimately freedom of thought, of creation, of creativity. And AI provides a lot of that opportunities. However, we have to also call out the hype, because it's not also moving as fast as we think. It's not moving as smart as we think. Not yet, but we need to make sure that we have not just the engineers, but we also need to have the social scientists. We need to have the educators. We need to have the economists. This is really the time for us to really see ourselves and the students and anyone that is in our ecosystems as multidiscipline systems engineers. Because we really have the opportunity now to design that. The reason I share that example of the redlining history is because everyone here, we all know the history of what it took to get to civil rights and the way that there was law that was actually passed to make sure that was protected. That was in the brick and mortar type of laws, right? What are we doing now to make sure that we're addressing and not losing our own individual rights, community rights in this digital sphere? And unfortunately, when it comes into let's just build it and see what happens, a lot is lost, and a lot of it could have really life-threatening situations where we think about, sure, I'll let the AI algorithm help me choose my vacation. Great, go and plan, do all this stuff. You're saving me like 8 hours. But when you're thinking about like my health condition, or if I'm going through the airport and my face is getting scanned without my acknowledgement, and it accidentally or mistakenly maps to somebody else, and then I'm being arrested, then that's my own safety, right? These things are happening right now. And this is the opportunity that we have to also think about, like, what is it? How do we want to leverage all of the time, energy, resources to build things that are really closing gaps of access? And I think AI can provide a lot of new opportunities. It can accelerate finding new ways to cure different types of diseases and cancer and things that we haven't seen. But at the same time, we also have to make sure we are addressing some of those historical biases that have been encoded in all of this. And if we just apply it blindly and don't think about the transparency behind the data sets, where did those data sets even come from? How are we addressing it in a more cohesive, and that's why those multidiscipline engineers, which is all of you all now, are important in all of this conversation. And so it's a complicated moment, but it's also, as you said, it's a moment of going back and forth because we're all learning. And we need these types of spaces to make sure we're having those types of very critical conversations, because I think that's the part that we want to make sure is having the critical lens into what are we building, why are we monetizing, are there new ways? And at the Kapor Center and the foundation, that's really what we do, looking at across from an ecosystem. And now I get to really double down on the policy at the federal level and also state level.
Thank you so much, Lili. And I think that we can all agree we're fortunate in our society, and now that you're a new resident to South Florida, that we have a thought leader like you that's leading this charge. And I love that idea of this being the vanguard of a new digital civil rights movement. And I think that when we think about public policy, and I know that elected officials and governmental leaders here have to grapple with it, those elected officials and those public policy leaders, they're the voice of the people. You know, obviously, and I run a for-profit business, but ultimately business self-organizes in the form of representatives and lobbyists and things like that, but it's our elected officials, it's our governmental officials that are equipping and making these important decisions on the behalf of everyday residents and families. And so what I like about our panel today is that we've got these distinct voices that really come from philanthropy and foundation to industry and academy. And in our prep call, one of the things that really stood out with Professor Sumit was he talked about this idea of these three phases that we're in. And by the way, we're going to touch upon some really cool, weird stuff with Professor Jha later, who actually in 2023 wrote a fantastic, co-authored a fantastic research report about dehallucination and the idea of how dehallucinating large language models is something that we have to think about. But I want to start with something that's a little bit more fundamental. I want to go right into the volley, because you riffed on that idea when I put that out there about these three phases that exist that I think are important for those of us who are reflecting in the public square when we're talking about AI. Can you walk us through that, Sumit?
Sure. So before I start there, when I was hearing you talk about the AI models which are already deployed and, probable bias in them, I thought of a story. So whenever I pass through some airports, this AI agents will find out that something must be wrong with my tummy, because it has been trained on so many people who are fit, that if they see someone who is not fit, the AI thinks something is wrong with this person. And the beauty of it is consistent. So it's wrong, and it's consistently wrong in the same way, and there is no way to provide feedback to say that, maybe you add some more data to fix this, So so that's interesting.
You've got another person in that group, so we're training the model on the Indian male belly, so it's good. We're good together on that.
So in terms of, the volley between man and machine, two things stand out. One is that we have been interfacing with machines for now 50, 60 years, even computers, And during that time, I think the focus in society has been on finding people who, for one reason or another, are very sort of clever at being taught in strange languages to strange machines. C++, C, Pastel, Fortran, whatever it is there. And I think that's now going to change very fast. So in the near future, that boundary will be drawn. You don't have to taught it a strange language. Machines will be able to understand a natural language. So then it will open up a whole new opportunity in the sense that now you don't need to find people who taught in strange languages. You need to find people who are able to express themselves very well, to a machine in a natural language. So now several questions arise. Does that happen in computer science departments? Does it happen in an English department? Does it happen in a fine arts department? Who is better equipped to train people to talk to machines in the natural language as opposed to strange languages? So that's one point. And the other point about this, volley between man and machine is, so essentially right now, AI more or less is not doing as well as human beings on many frontiers. So right now, when we talk of the interface, we are more worried about how do we tell the AI that you are doing something wrong and you fix it. For example, in the airport case, you say, some bellies are of different shapes, let's fix this, Then there is probably going to be a time sometime soon when AI and human beings are comparable. At that time, you may have a peer who is an AI, and you may want to work with this peer to achieve some mission outcome. At that point, there needs to be a trust between the AI peer and the human being. Now, instead of teaching it, it's a matter of trust. You learn and you teach. And there is no reason to think, not to think why AI will eventually may become superior in certain aspects, in certain tasks. In some games and certain other environments, the AI is already better than the best human being on the planet. So then the question becomes, how do you make the AI teach human beings how to be very effective at something? So if an AI driver has learned to drive in a really beautiful manner in Miami, and we want to teach people how to drive better in this city, then maybe driving in Miami is different from driving in Pittsburgh, and maybe there is something unique to learn about it. So that would be something we would then want to do. Let the AI teach human beings what it has learned, and then use that to complete the volley from the machine to the man.
What I think is so powerful about that, and I love that you mentioned the word trust, because a lot of what we're ultimately exploring, because we've had the conversations from government and the perspectives of lawmakers that are sounding in on this, that if we are liberating pieces of our data, and then we're putting these powerful algorithms that have sort of untold computational power attached to them, we have to then ask, who are the arbiters of trust in that? And another thing that you said, Sumit, that really, I think we should all double click on, especially for those of us that are really of any discipline, as Lili mentioned, is this idea that some of these large language models there's no easy explanation of how, when you're in, and this is for Madam Chair, when you're in elementary school and you solve the math problem, but you kind of knew the answer, but you have no idea how to show the work. It's important to realize that some of these algorithms can't actually show you how they solve the work. So pushing to that next frontier that Sumit mentioned, as a computer scientist that's published, as a scholar on this, is saying that there's still more work to be done, and that's actually pushing forward the human endeavor. And Mark, when we were in our prep call, for those of you who don't know, Mark is an extraordinary leader in our community, works as the chief digital officer of a very large bank here, and in his role, obviously, has to be thinking about safeguarding all kinds of things and how frontier technologies, the same way our friends that are in government have to be thinking about protecting our data and keeping our system safe. I mean, we don't want to go and hit our Apple Pay for our colada and it comes up blank. I mean, we want to know that the money clears. And so Mark is thinking about this and dealing with this on a daily basis. And you said something that stood out for me that I think when we're talking about AI, economy, and society, you talked about, well, how do we deal with this exponential jump that's about to happen from an LLM being a 7-year-old to being a 17-year-old? And I'll tell you, I've got a 17-year-old, and that's quite a thing to have to deal with a 17-year-old, right? Versus a 7-year-old, where I have nieces and nephews that are age. You just say, well, do it because I say so. Nobody is ever telling a 17-year-old, do it because I say so, because they are actualized in a very different way and have a different sense of agency. So 7-year-old to 17-year-old in your work as a chief digital officer of a consequential bank in our region, how are you thinking about some of this stuff around customer data and all kinds of other weird considerations for somebody in your role?
Yeah, and Lili, your comment on AI is a reflection of us, or it should be, is, I think, spot on in terms of how we're looking at this as well, because when it comes to who we lend to, those guidelines have to be fair lending, correct? So if we have an AI model that's saying, hey, once they see all this information about a potential borrower, what is the decision criteria going into this? So that's one thing that we're looking at, right, to ensure that we have fair lending AI models in the future, and as an industry as a whole. In addition to that, there's certain parts of AI that's going to advance faster than others, right? So for a 17-year-old, me as a 17-year-old, maybe video games I was really great at, but writing not so much. Now it's very different. So as industries are focused on advancing certain parts of AI, the biases that are put into this model really need to keep up, depending on the industry. And in addition to what we're doing, is making sure our data is safeguarded. From a regulation standpoint, all of this information that comes into a financial institution, we have people that have taken out a mortgage, we have all of your information about your financial history. If we're putting that into an AI model, we have to be really physically responsible of safeguards of that to make sure that it's not going out to the public if some of these systems get hacked. So that's a real concern. So I think also what we'll start to see is a lot of private AI models, so that we'll start to see things move from cloud to on-prem, so that we have more increased safeguards into these models as well. So those are just a few things we're thinking about.
It makes all of us sort of sleep easier knowing that there are leaders like yourself that are safeguarding. I mean, so much of what our world is about is not just about Big Brother, so the government's role in the data they're controlling, but Little Sister, who are private entities that are controlling a lot of our really important data. Because you mentioned something, you apply for a mortgage or you apply for a car loan, and all of a sudden that person sitting on the other side of the table and that database that information is in, I mean, that's like the blood work for our financial lives. And Lili, I want to turn back to some of the work that you've been doing for a long time, and also pay tribute to something that, as you arrived into this region and we started to deepen our conversations about how frontier technology and people are deploying Godzilla amounts of capital in these spaces, and they're just kind of like racing forward with these mindsets of like, just build, 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 don't ask any questions, right? And there were some comments earlier around lessons learned from social media and what happened there. And the truth is, like, it goes back to questions like, did the government in many spaces ever get it right with social media? And it's like, TBD, you could write 50 PhD dissertations on that. Each one would draw a different conclusion. But you were one of the people who brought to me a concept that I'd heard of, but I don't think I'd really factored in. And I think it's important for everybody, regardless of where you are in the public square of political affiliation or partisan affiliation, should be thinking about this term algorithmic bias and how it lands and it hits upon all of us. Can you give us a little bit of Wikipedia on that, right? Hit us with a wiki on that.
Sure.
And then also give us some insights on how you see this beginning to shape up, especially when you consider that, do public policymakers know enough to sound in on something that is a very abstract concept?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that he shared some of those examples, right? Where when we think about all AI is really lots of data, lots of advanced algorithms. We've seen it. It's just at a new scale that we haven't seen it before. The challenge is when it starts to make decisions and automated decisions that aren't transparent, that we don't know, the rationale, and it starts to get so complex that some of the companies are saying, well, it's too complex, so we don't know what it's doing. Would you let your teenager say, like, well, I don't know what it's doing? Would you let your teenager use that or deploy that? No, we have to, have those conversations. And as an engineer, like when I was trained as an engineer, these are the things you would do. You would stress test it. First of all, you would do the design, and then you would identify how this would work, how it would break, how it wouldn't. And then when you actually have it built, before you release it, you would actually test all the edge cases, right? And then that's where you would find things that could either make it better or things that you're like, hey, wait, let's pause, right? And so it is a little bit of this Oppenheimer moment that we're having in this time, because I reflect to what my mentor told me years ago when I was at Accenture. And by the way, Accenture, all these other companies, 7 years ago, almost 10 years ago, there were AI excellence centers across the world already. So this has been going on for a while. And the thing that's also been going across for a while, it's the algorithmic bias. And then when we think about all the data that is being used and collected by you, we don't really know how it's being mapped on the back end, right? But if you're starting with data points that are already biased, and that's why I wanted to share that example of the redlining, because if we think about how communities were segregated, how communities that were primarily Black were given a higher interest rates and lower mortgage value for their homes, right? This stuff is still happening right now. There's a lawsuit that took place, I think, like 2-3 years ago for that. But there are laws that protect us. So there is this conversation of like, where does algorithmic bias show up in our everyday lives? And so we actually, at the Kapor Center, did a partnership with Consumer Reports because we wanted every consumer, let's start there, right? Let's start there and understanding what's happening when you're trying to buy a home. Are you being, is your zip code determining your rate and your race? Is that determining your rate that you're getting? The historical background, we know that credit scores can be very complex things. It's something that could be better redesigned. But that was one example, right? So with Consumer Reports, we actually did like a 3-piece narrative, mini documentaries with scholars, with researchers to really look at the past to be able to see where we want to go. So we looked at the discriminatory aspects there and how algorithmic bias shows up, how all these different reasons and redlining histories that were in the past done on paper were now digitized. And when they're digitized and at scale, it's even harder to know when you're being impacted. But when you take a look at healthcare, right? If we take a look at just as simple as the oximeter that Apple right now is fighting for their patents. The oximeters has been around for like probably, I don't know, since my grandma or something like that. It's been around for a long time. But it's something that we were still in the midst of the pandemic, still relying on our health. That oximeter has been known to not perform best or better or at par, depending on the shade of your skin. So the darker your skin is, the less accurate it is. And there's research, there's been studies that there's data that has been showing this, right? And when we think about as you're building a new product, how are you testing it, right? How are you looking at it? If you're only testing it in a very specific manner and it's only being created by a specific manner, you're losing all of these edge cases that could actually make the product better. So that showed up in that study. So that's another part of algorithmic bias. That's just an example. But it's also shown that as a Black woman, when you go in to get healthcare, you're not going to get the same quality healthcare. And there's logs that show the number of visits, the wait time, so much stuff that has to go there. Same for also Latinas and also non-English speaking, right? When you take a look at the types of services and how it gets codified. If you rely on a lot of automation and robots that would be going there, and if they're working off those types of biased data, nobody's correcting it, then we're doing injustice just in that. And then the third part the other part of the series was looking around facial recognition, right? We do it every day. You log in. I don't know if you knew all the stuff that you signed off when you agreed to do that, or every app that you're using, the Snaps, the Instagrams. There's a lot of data that's being collected that unless you also have really responsible engineers in the back, that you have like the actual teams that are building these products really analyzing and saying like, maybe we shouldn't build that, or maybe there's like a false positive that just keeps coming and there's a specific pattern. Maybe we should go look at it. If you don't have people that are conscious, you're gonna have algorithmic bias all over. However, the algorithmic bias in some situations if you don't have those protected classes being really thought out from an engineering and data analysis, that's where you're going to run into trouble. But there are a lot of ways to create the transparency right now, especially on what we've been working at the Kapor Foundation. We're part of a larger collective with the White House to look at how do we help build and fund and support organizations who are working on AI for public interest. So what does public interest look like? How do we protect democracy? How do we protect workers? How do we help advance the students going into this sector? How do we help also just provide opportunities for new companies to be started? So there's a lot. I can keep going on because I'm already long-winded. But I wanted to share those specific examples of how algorithmic bias shows up in everything that we do. And this is even before all this new investment in new technology. So we already have a lot of stuff to be working on that we need to be fixing. But I'll pause there because we can keep going on
Thank you for
forever.
that. Thank you for walking us through that. Sumit, I think you were something you wanted to sound in on.
I wanted to add to what Lili is saying and just echo what her statements were. So before 2018 and 19, there was a phase of AI where at least human beings were designing the AI, in which stage engineers could at least look at bias, try to do the right thing. Post 2018-19, there has been a break in AI, not just a breakthrough, I would also say a break in how AI is being done. And it is now the same model that takes different data and produces different outcome. So if you feed it a lot of textual data, it becomes ChatGPT and starts talking to you. If you feed it a lot of images, of human beings, it starts doing facial recognition. If you feed it a lot of automated data, it starts doing analysis of your radar signals. So this is very strange because now a human being is not even in tight control of the design of that system. Now it is just the same system being pumped with all different kinds of data. So now the dependence on data and that data being made by us human beings with all our flaws becomes even more deeper than before.
Right.
I really like that you broke that down, and I think it's also part of the public inquiry that's needed, because sometimes when you lay out your runway of all of the considerations that are there, like we're presented with more questions than we have answers right now. And then on the other end, there are spaces within a society, whether it's military or businesses, that have a computational advantage. Like you can say, well, they've already thought through this more robustly. Well, they've thought through it against their mission scope, but not necessarily against, if you're a business, and I know I'm an entrepreneur, you've got one goal, which is every business in the world's objective is to make money. You know, whether you're selling oil or you're selling pastelitos, right? And similarly, militaries are machines that are designed to optimize victory, right? On the behalf and sort of dominance of your enemy. Not bad, keeps us safe in the world where, you know, it's a complex world. Sumit, I want to go back to something that I mentioned that is an area of you've got some real expertise around, which is this concept of hallucinations, but then dehallucination. And this is an uncomfortable question really for all of us, and I'll read it. What are the challenges to a free and open democratic society that are presented by over-reliance of AI models that are prone to hallucinations? And the corollary to that is, what safeguards can technologists and also public policy officials take to safeguard the public?
Sure. So the first part of the question, I am not an expert at. I'm a computer scientist, so I will just avoid it.
Great.
The second part of the question is, you know, if we have AI models, which are really these data-driven large language models, how are there situations where we can use them in a reliable manner? So there are many, many problems in the world where finding the right answer is hard. But once you have the answer, verifying that the answer is right is easy. As I have put this in a natural language, but there are mathematical statements to that effect. So then the question is, for all those classes of problems where verifying the answer is right is easy, there you can actually use AI in a very reliable manner. The AI can be asked to generate a response. You can verify the response using traditional algorithm mechanisms. And if the response is right, that's fine. If not, you advise the AI, you know, I think your response is not right. By the way, here is why I think your response is not right. Can you come back to me with a different answer? And so we have done this. And we have found that even on very complex planning problems that involve going from, you know, meeting very different plans to execute something for robots, maybe the first time the answer is wrong, the second time the answer is wrong, but after 8 or 9 times, the same AI says, yeah, now I understand the plot. Here is my refined answer. And that answer is right. And we can verify it to be right. We can certify it to be right. So in those cases, AI is reliable. AI can be used. But in the general framework of just large language models talking to human beings, commenting on news, or commenting on raw facts from history, that is much more difficult.
One thing that you shared when we were in our sort of prep discussion is these sort of bigger existential questions around, can these AI models actually become creative? And you mentioned in some of the areas of your work, which is fascinating, is really even getting to the point of like, can AI actually create sort of creative poetry? Can it design mathematical proofs? This is something that is a major departure from the track that we've been on thus far. Can you give us some perspective on that?
Sure. So one thing we did was, so there are measures of creativity for human beings, and different human beings have different scores. The average is around, say, on some tests is between 72 and 80. So this is the range in which human beings perform, more or less. So then we asked the question that if we go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to do the same test, where will it perform? And we did not know the answer. I was hoping somewhere in the middle. Actually, it performs much worse. It performs something like 69, 70 on its own. which means on that test, it turns out to be less creative than human beings, which now made us wonder, are there fundamental reasons why that model performs so poorly on this test? And these models, the ones which are in use right now, have not been designed to be creative. They have been designed to coerce them into producing facts of information from history, answering questions about known facts. So they are not particularly creative entities. So we have been doing some work on trying to induce creativity into these models, where there will be a variant of these models which you will not rely upon to do history, because it could be factually wrong, but which should write beautiful poetry, which should score higher on creative tests. And you would wonder, why do I want to make creative poetry? Probably not, but you want to design new kinds of aircrafts. You want to explore the space of new kinds of machines for doing quantum computing, where human beings may not have very good intuition. So for those kinds of things, you would want this AI model to actually have an open mind and think very creatively.
I love that. Inducing a couple of digital mojitos to get the machine brain.
That's a good idea.
Little flow, feeling a little bit more like Richard Blanco, or any other brilliant poet. So, Mark, I want to jump back to you, because when you're in a business like you are at Amerant Bank as Chief Digital Officer, there are lots of considerations you have to have, which you've talked about, but also you're in a world where on one end you have to operate within complex regulatory environments, but then on the other end you have to advance the endeavor of innovation. And on the other side of the fence, the bad actors don't have any handcuffs around how quickly they can go towards innovating, faking, what do deep fakes mean with two-factor authorization, where they got your voice, they got your video, they got all of this stuff. How is this touching upon the realities of your work and the considerations that you have to navigate?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, you mentioned it previously, we're a for-profit bank that's highly regulated, that we care about our customers, we care about the data of our customers, and complying with the regulation, right? And to that, we also have to advance our efficiency within the organization. I'm sure we've all seen these headlines, AI is going to take jobs and things like that. Who knows if that's true? I don't think an AI is going to replace us anytime soon. But there are functions within our organization and every organization that AI can provide efficiencies. So then the question becomes, all right, well, what do we do with this influx of time that's back to the team member, and how do we incentivize them to do more creative thought, or at a very macro scale, how do we incentivize them if companies become very efficient and there starts to be layoffs? Should there be some type of incentive for those folks? Those are real questions that we have to deal with at a micro level, at the institutional level, and then also think about at the macro level with regulators and policymakers. So that's the volley, kind of staying on topic there with the push-pull between, hey, we need to become more efficient. That helps our bottom line revenue, but at the same time, we have to think about all these safeguards as well within our team members. And on the fraud side, you mentioned it, where we have facial recognition on our phones. This a few years ago, we were talking about this in the finance industry. Hey, what a great way to do KYC. You have your face on your phone when Apple first came out with this technology, and then that's extremely secure. Now we're in the world of deepfakes, where a computer programmer can take a picture of you and render you either a picture or a video that's totally real. This is going to surface in all areas, right? Imagine if you're doing something malicious, and then that's brought up in a courtroom. Like, how are we going to deal with that? So internally, we have to figure out how do we understand the programming behind that model that was able to create these deepfakes, so that we can put it into, because we still want to advance technology, right? We can't let this be a total blocker. We have to figure out a way to overcome it, just like we do with fraudsters today at the institution. So we have to work with technology companies to say, all right, well, this is what they're doing, and stay one step ahead. Where these fraudsters, that's all they do, all day, every day. So we have to have a lot of concentration and a lot of time devoted to to these things that we're implementing, especially on the KYC front.
I appreciate that. We're almost at time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to close with a question for every one of the panelists. And the question, it's Friday afternoon, right? So I want everybody, just relax, everyone. I have to drive from here to the middle of nowhere for a Boy Scouts camping trip. So this is the highlight of my weekend right now, getting to spend time with all of you, because I'm about to drive to Florida, okay? So I'm here in the 305, con mi gente. So what I want to ask is, this is the closing question, and I know Georgiana's there on the time. She's got it, right? But the question is, if you had the most followers on planet Earth on Twitter, right, and you could write one tweet today that was a signal to everybody on the planet about something related to this issue topic, right? Pay attention to this for 2024. What would that tweet be?
For 2024.
For 2024, if you had more followers than Elon Musk on X, and you wanted to send a signal. This is important. This is really, really important, because this is the world that we're operating in, right? I want to ask everyone. By the way, steal this question if you're ever doing a panel. It gets people to the deep truth.
I'll steal my business school professor's quote. AI won't take your job, but somebody who knows how to use it will.
Yeah.
So make sure that you are upskilling yourself. And so I really get to the question of the talent. But when we hear all these things, and I know all the stuff that I share is very concerning and all this stuff, but think about like these big problems, but these also need big solutions, right? And we need you and folks that you're working with in the community to be part of these solutions. And in order to be part of these solutions and designing it, you need to know the language of it. You need to be part of it, and in order to be part of it, you need to upskill yourself, and don't be afraid of it. And I shared that example when I first started my engineering career. I got displaced because the stuff that I was doing hand became automated thanks to Microsoft. And at that early stage, I was like, oh, well, we got to go and now we got to work with software more. Okay, great, and it just kept going. So I would say that for the folks that are here and your communities, don't be afraid of it, because if anything, we need more and more folks to be part of it now, so we can build better things and we can use it for things that are actually closing gaps of access. And so to play with it, test it out, and ask those critical questions, and be part of the change in the
I'm hitting retweet to your entire Twitter thread. That was a thread, by the way. It was not a tweet, but it's the 305. It's okay. We'll take it.
I love that quote.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say, observe, orient, detect, and act, the OODA loop. So this is now OODA at the speed of a computer. So just be in the OODA loop, be observant, orient, upskill, reinvent, detect, and then act.
Love that. Hit retweet on that. Mark, close this out, my friend.
I would say get involved. We're all human, right? Everyone has a really great story, and the more you learn, the more you get involved, the more impact you can have. That would be my message.
Awesome. Retweet to that. Join me in giving a big round of applause for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Saif, Mark, Sumit, and Lili for a very exciting and intriguing conversation. That was our last panel. Now we're moving one floor up. Am I getting that right, Danny? One floor up. And once you get off the elevator, you will see signage directing you to one of the 3 rooms, breakout rooms. One breakout room will be about AI and workforce development, another AI and critical infrastructure, and another AI and governance. Thank you all for joining us. See you in our breakout rooms.